The letter trembled in Sarah Morrison's hands as she stared in disbelief at the stagecoach driver who'd delivered it. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of Willow Creek's busy Main Street. The unsealed envelope contained both her original letter of introduction and a hastily scrawled note, "Return to sender. Don't want damaged goods." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as tears threatened to spill. 3 weeks of grueling travel across the frontier, leaving everything behind in Boston, only to be rejected sight unseen by the man who had agreed to marry her. "I'm sorry, miss," the driver said awkwardly. "Mr. Owens paid for your return passage. We leave tomorrow morning." The name struck her like a physical blow. Matthew Owens, the cattle rancher who had responded to her advertisement in the matrimonial news with such seemingly thoughtful letters. The man who had promised her a home, respect, and the possibility of affection growing between them. The man who now deemed her damaged goods without ever meeting her face to face. "There must be some mistake," Sarah insisted, clutching the letter tighter. "I've corresponded with Mr. Owens for months. He's expecting me." The driver shifted uncomfortably. "All I know is what I was told, miss. Mr. Owens said he's changed his mind about needing a wife. Says to tell you he's sorry for the inconvenience." Sarah stood frozen on the dusty street, her small trunk of possessions beside her, as the driver tipped his hat and walked away. Willow Creek, Colorado Territory, 1878, a town she'd never seen before today and would apparently leave tomorrow, rejected and humiliated. "Miss? You all right there?" Sarah turned to find a tall man watching her with concern. His weathered face suggested he spent most days under the harsh western sun, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his worn cowboy hat. She couldn't finish the sentence as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Here now," he said gently, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Whatever it is can't be worth all this." Sarah accepted the handkerchief gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Michael Miller. Most folks call me Mike." He gestured to the letter still clutched in her hand. "Bad news." "The worst," she admitted, not knowing why she was confiding in a stranger but desperate for a sympathetic ear. "I'm a mail-order bride, or I was supposed to be. But it seems my intended has rejected me before we've even met." Mike's expression darkened. "Matthew Owens?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "You know him?" "Everyone knows Matt Owens in these parts. Got the biggest spread north of town." Mike studied her face carefully. "And he sent you away without so much as meeting you?" She nodded miserably, then held out the cruel note. "He called me damaged goods." Mike took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read the words. Without warning, he pulled a match from his vest pocket, struck it against his boot, and set the note aflame. "What are you doing?" Sarah gasped, watching as the paper curled and blackened. "That ain't Matt's handwriting," Mike said firmly, dropping the burning paper to the ground and crushing it beneath his boot. "And those sure as hell ain't his words." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "How can you be sure?" "Because Matt Owens is my closest friend, and he's been talking about nothing but your arrival for weeks." Mike's expression was grave. "Something's not right here. Matt rode out to his north pasture 3 days ago to move some cattle before you arrived. He should have been back yesterday." Sarah's concern shifted immediately. "Do you think something's happened to him?" "I aim to find out." Mike glanced at her traveling dress and impractical shoes. "You got anything more suitable for riding?" "In my trunk." "But surely you don't expect me to, Miss Morrison. If you came all this way to marry Matt Owens, then I reckon you deserve to at least meet the man before deciding whether to stay or go." He gestured to a nearby building with a sign reading Miller's General Store. "That's my place. Go on inside and ask my clerk, Jenny, to show you to the back room. You can change there. I'll arrange for your trunk to be brought over." Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. Something in this stranger's confident manner inspired trust, and the alternative, returning to Boston in disgrace, was unthinkable. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." "Mike," he corrected with a small smile. "And don't thank me yet. We've got a hard ride ahead of us." An hour later, Sarah emerged from the back room of Miller's General Store wearing a split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a simple blouse she'd packed for her new life on the ranch. She'd pinned her auburn hair in a practical knot and covered it with a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. Mike looked up from the counter where he was packing supplies into saddlebags and gave an approving nod. You'll do just fine, Miss Morrison. Sarah, please, she replied, feeling oddly comfortable with this man who was going out of his way to help her. Sarah. He smiled briefly, then turned serious. I've sent word to the sheriff about that note and Matt's absence. He's going to ask around town, see if anyone noticed anything unusual. Do you think Mr. Owens is in danger? Mike's expression was grim as he finished loading the saddlebags. Matt's got enemies. Man can't run the biggest ranch in the county without making a few. But this feels personal. Sarah followed Mike outside where two horses stood ready, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, gentle-looking mare. Ever ridden before? Mike asked, eyeing her appraisingly. I grew up riding in Massachusetts, Sarah assured him, though perhaps not Western style. You'll adjust, Mike said, helping her mount the mare. We've got about 4 hours of daylight left. If we push hard, we can reach the north pasture by sundown. As they rode out of town, Sarah found herself studying her unexpected champion. Michael Miller moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the saddle. His strong hands held the reins loosely, and his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. You said Mr. Owens is your closest friend, she ventured after they'd been riding for some time. Mike nodded. Known him since we were boys back in Missouri. Came out west together after the war. You fought in the war between the states. Union side. Both of us. His expression grew distant. War has a way of binding men together. When it ended, neither of us wanted to go back to what we'd left behind. Too many ghosts. He glanced at her. Matt wrote me about you, you know. Said your letters showed a spirit that would do well out here. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. He never mentioned having such a close friend nearby. That's Matt for you. Man of few words, even in writing, I suppose. Mike smiled slightly. He's a good man, Sarah. One of the best I know. That's why that note didn't sit right with me. Matt Owens would never call anyone damaged goods, especially not a woman he'd invited to be his wife. The sincerity in his voice touched Sarah deeply. I appreciate your faith in him, and your willingness to help a stranger. No stranger, Mike corrected. You're Matt's intended. That makes you as good as family. They rode in companionable silence after that, the vast Colorado landscape spreading around them. Sarah marveled at the rugged beauty of the terrain, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. Perhaps this wild country could offer her the fresh start she so desperately needed. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Mike pointed ahead to where the land rose into a series of rolling hills. That's the northern edge of Matt's property. His line cabin should be just beyond that rise. Sarah felt her heart quicken. Despite the circumstances, she was finally about to meet the man she'd agreed to marry. What would Matthew Owens think of her? Would he be disappointed? She smoothed her hair self-consciously, then chided herself for vanity. If Mr. Owens was indeed in trouble, her appearance was the least of their concerns. Mike suddenly raised his hand, signaling her to stop. His posture had changed, alert and tense. Something's wrong. There should be smoke from the chimney. He urged his horse forward at a faster pace, and Sarah followed, anxiety tightening her chest. As they crested the rise, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a stand of pines. No smoke rose from the stone chimney, and the door hung partially open. Stay behind me, Mike ordered, drawing his pistol as they approached. They dismounted a safe distance from the cabin, and Mike tied both horses to a nearby tree. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched him advance cautiously toward the silent building. Matt, Mike called, his voice carrying in the still evening air. Matt Owens, you in there? No response came from the darkened cabin. Mike moved to the open doorway, gun ready, and peered inside. After a tense moment, he entered, disappearing from Sarah's view. Long seconds passed before he reappeared in the doorway. It's clear, he called. But there's been trouble. Sarah hurried forward, her heart pounding. Inside the small cabin, furniture lay overturned, and items were scattered across the floor as if a struggle had taken place. A bloodstain darkened the wooden planks near the stone fireplace. Oh no, Sarah whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. Is that, can't say whose blood it is, Mike said grimly, kneeling to examine the stain. Not enough for a killing wound, at least. But someone was hurt here. Sarah forced herself to look away from the blood, searching the cabin for clues. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, apparently abandoned in haste. On the floor near the overturned chair, she spotted a gleam of metal. "Mr. Miller, Mike," she corrected herself, pointing. "What's that?" Mike moved to where she indicated and picked up a tarnished brass button. His expression hardened as he turned it over in his palm. "This is from a Pinkerton's coat." "A detective?" Sarah asked, confused. "Why would a Pinkerton agent be here?" "Not a real one." Mike's voice was tight with anger. "This button is from Herbert Coleman's coat. He likes to pretend he's a Pinkerton, but he's just a hired thug who works for Richard Chambers." "Who is Richard Chambers?" Mike's face darkened. "A man who's been trying to buy Matt's land for the past year. Matt's ranch sits on what might be the route for the new rail spur. If Chambers controls that land, he controls who gets access to the railroad." Sarah felt cold dread spreading through her. "You think this Chambers person has kidnapped Mr. Owens?" "It's looking that way." Mike tucked the button into his pocket and moved to the cabin's single window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "Question is, why now? And what does that note to you have to do with it?" Sarah considered this, her mind racing. If Mr. Owens suddenly had a wife, would that complicate Mr. Chambers' plans somehow? Mike turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Matt's ranch is too big for one man. Everyone knows he needs help, needs family to make it work. If he had a wife." He nodded slowly. Chambers might have worried that Matt would fight harder to keep his land with a wife to protect. "So Mr. Chambers arranged to have me sent away," Sarah concluded, anger replacing her fear. "To keep Mr. Owens isolated and vulnerable. That's how I read it." Mike checked his pocket watch. "It's getting too dark to track them tonight. We'll need to make camp and start fresh at first light." Sarah nodded, then looked around the disordered cabin. "We could stay here, couldn't we? I could put things to rights while you tend to the horses." Mike seemed surprised by the offer, but nodded. "That would be the sensible thing to do. I'll bring in our supplies and see to the animals." While Mike was outside, Sarah busied herself restoring order to the cabin. She righted the overturned furniture, swept the floor, carefully avoiding the bloodstain, and found clean linens to make up the narrow bed in the corner. In a cupboard, she discovered basic cooking supplies and set about preparing a simple meal from the provisions Mike had brought. When Mike returned, he paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed space. Sarah stood by the now-lit stove, stirring a pot of beans and bacon. A fresh candle burned on the table, which had been set with the cabin's mismatched dishes. "You work fast," he observed, setting down their saddlebags. Sarah shrugged, oddly pleased by his approval. "I've always found that practical tasks help clear the mind, and we'll need clear heads to find Mr. Owens tomorrow." They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. After the meal, Mike insisted Sarah take the bed while he would sleep on a bedroll near the door in case of uninvited visitors. As Sarah lay beneath the rough woolen blanket, staring at the shadows dancing on the cabin's ceiling, she found herself thinking not of the man she had traveled so far to marry, but of the man sleeping just a few feet away. Michael Miller had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd experienced in years back in Boston. His quiet strength and unwavering loyalty to his friend spoke of a character rarely found in the society she'd left behind. "Mike," she whispered into the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," came his immediate reply. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me." Not many would have. She heard him shift on his bedroll. "Get some sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a long day." Sarah closed her eyes, oddly comforted by his presence despite the uncertainty that awaited them. Dawn arrived with streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Sarah awoke to find Mike already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He'd stepped outside, giving her privacy to dress and prepare for the day ahead. "I found tracks," he announced when she joined him outside, gratefully accepting the cup of strong coffee he offered. 3 horses headed east. One set of prints is deeper than the others." "As if the rider were heavier?" Sarah suggested. "Or carrying something?" Mike nodded, looking impressed. "Or someone. I'm guessing they've got Matt tied up on one of the horses." The good news is, they're not moving fast. Probably headed for Chambers' hunting cabin on the other side of Serpent Ridge. "How far is that?" "Half a day's hard ride." Mike frowned at the horizon. "They've got nearly a full day's head start on us, but we might be able to intercept them if we take the high pass through the ridge." "Is that dangerous?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer from his expression. It's not a trail many use, he admitted. But I know the way, and our horses are fresh. If we leave within the hour, we might reach Chambers' cabin by mid-afternoon. Sarah squared her shoulders. Then we should leave immediately. The ride that followed tested Sarah's endurance and horsemanship to their limits. The high pass, Mike had mentioned, proved to be little more than a narrow game trail that wound treacherously along the face of Serpent Ridge. In places, the path was so steep that they had to dismount and lead the horses single file, with sheer drops just inches away. Not much farther, Mike encouraged as they paused to rest the horses at midday. You're doing well, Sarah. Most city women would have turned back miles ago. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow with her sleeve. I'm not most women, Mr. Miller, and I don't appreciate being judged by where I come from rather than who I am. A slow smile spread across Mike's face. No, you certainly aren't. Matt chose well. The reminder of their purpose to rescue her intended husband sent a pang of guilt through Sarah. In the intensity of their journey, she'd almost forgotten that Matthew Owens was the reason she'd come west. The man she had agreed to marry. They reached the eastern slope of Serpent Ridge by early afternoon. Mike led them to a sheltered hollow where a small stream provided water for themselves and the horses. Chambers' cabin is in the valley below, Mike explained, pointing to a distant structure barely visible through the trees. I can see smoke from the chimney. Someone's there. Sarah strained her eyes. I don't see any guards or lookouts. Coleman and his partner aren't known for their caution. They're used to intimidating, not being hunted. Mike checked his pistol methodically. Here's what we'll do. I'll approach from the south, create a distraction. You circle around from the north. There's a back door to that cabin. When you hear commotion out front, slip in the back and find Matt. Sarah's heart raced. Shouldn't I be the distraction while you free Mr. Owens? You're better with that gun than I am. Maybe, Mike conceded. But Coleman and his partner know me. They'll shoot first if they see me sneaking around. They don't know. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small derringer. Can you use this? Sarah took the gun, its weight unfamiliar but not completely foreign. My father believed women should know how to protect themselves. I've fired a pistol before, though not often. Just point and squeeze if you have to, Mike advised. But with any luck, you won't need it. Get Matt out and head for the trees. I'll find you. The plan set, they separated. Sarah led her mare carefully through the trees, circling wide to approach the cabin from the northern side, as instructed. The structure came into clearer view as she neared a crude but substantial hunting cabin with a stone chimney from which gray smoke lazily spiraled. She tethered her horse out of sight and crept closer on foot, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. The back of the cabin had a small porch with a door and a single window. Through the dirty glass, she could make out shadowy movement inside, but couldn't distinguish figures. Sarah waited, the derringer clutched in her trembling hand, for Mike's distraction. Minutes stretched endlessly until a sudden shout from the front of the cabin made her jump. Coleman, I know you're in there. Come on out and face me like a man. Mike's voice rang with authority and anger. Sarah heard cursing from inside the cabin, followed by the sound of chairs scraping and boots hurrying across wooden floors. This was her chance. Gathering her courage, she darted across the open space to the back door. To her relief, it was unlocked. She eased it open and slipped inside, finding herself in a small kitchen area. Beyond an open doorway, she could see two men with their backs to her, focused on the front of the cabin where Mike continued his taunts. Where is he? She whispered to herself, scanning the room. A muffled sound from her left caught her attention. In the corner, partially hidden by sacks of provisions, lay a man bound hand and foot, a gag across his mouth. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, but he was conscious and his eyes widened in recognition when he saw her. Matthew Owens. It had to be. Sarah pressed a finger to her lips and crept toward him, keeping low. Outside, she could hear Mike continuing his distraction, his voice growing louder and more provocative. I always knew you were a coward, Coleman, hiding behind Chambers' money instead of facing a real man. A gunshot rang out, making Sarah flinch. One of the men at the front window laughed harshly. Your friend's got a death wish, Owens. Sarah reached Matthew, her fingers working quickly to loosen the gag. As it fell away, he whispered hoarsely, behind you. She whirled to find a third man she hadn't noticed stepping from a side room, his gun already drawn. "Well now, what have we here?" he drawled. "A little rescue party." Sarah raised the derringer with shaking hands. "Stay back." The man Herbert Coleman, she presumed from his tarnished brass buttons, merely chuckled. "Lady, that little pop gun couldn't stop a rabbit, let alone me. Now be a good girl and put it down before you hurt yourself." "I'd listen to the lady if I were you, Coleman." Mike's voice came from the front doorway. Somehow, he'd managed to enter the cabin undetected. His pistol was aimed steadily at Coleman's chest. Coleman froze, his eyes darting between Mike and his two companions, who had turned at the sound of Mike's voice. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought a shootout was inevitable, but then Coleman slowly raised his hands. "Easy, Miller. This is just business. No need for anyone to die today." "Untie him," Mike ordered, gesturing toward Matthew with his gun. One of Coleman's men moved reluctantly to comply, cutting Matthew's bonds with a knife. As soon as his hands were free, Matthew grabbed the knife and pushed himself upright, his face contorted with pain, but his eyes blazing with anger. "Chambers put you up to this?" Matthew demanded, his voice rough from the gag. "Thought kidnapping me would force me to sell?" Coleman shrugged, his hands still raised. "Man's getting desperate. Railroad surveyors are due next month. Without your land, the spur goes 10 miles south. And the town dies," Mike finished. So Chambers decided to remove the obstacle mat and scare off his mail order bride in one move. Sarah felt Matthew's gaze shift to her, really seeing her for the first time. "You're Sarah Morrison?" She nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny despite the tension of the moment. "How did you find me?" Matthew asked, directing the question to both of them. "Your friend didn't believe the note they sent in your name," Sarah explained. "He knew you wouldn't call anyone damaged goods." Matthew's expression darkened. "They did what?" He turned furious eyes on Coleman. "You wrote to her claiming to be me? Sent her away?" Coleman had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Chambers' idea. Said a wife would just complicate things." "Seems he was right about that," Mike said with a hint of satisfaction. "Now, we're going to back out of here nice and slow. You boys are going to stay put until we're gone, or I start putting holes in you." "Understood." Under Mike's watchful eye, Sarah helped the injured Matthew outside to where the horses waited. Despite his injuries, Matthew insisted he could ride, though Sarah noticed he winced with every movement. "Chambers won't let this go," Matthew warned as they mounted up. "Not with so much money at stake." "Let me worry about Chambers," Mike replied. "Right now, we need to get you back to town and have the doc look at those ribs." They rode cautiously at first, alert for pursuit, but Coleman and his men seemed content to lick their wounds rather than chase after them. As the cabin disappeared from view behind them, Sarah found herself riding between the two men, Matthew Owens, the stranger she had come to marry, and Michael Miller, the man who had risked everything to help her. The silence grew uncomfortable until Matthew finally spoke. "I got your last letter," he said to Sarah. "The one where you described the apple orchards back home. I was looking forward to meeting you." He paused, then added awkwardly, "I still am." Sarah smiled politely, but found herself unable to summon the excitement she should feel at finally meeting her intended. Instead, her eyes kept drifting to Mike, who rode slightly ahead, his broad shoulders tense as he scanned their surroundings for danger. They made camp that night in a protected hollow, unable to reach town before dark with Matthew's injuries slowing their pace. While Mike saw to the horses, Sarah helped Matthew settle against a fallen log, concern etching her features as she noted his labored breathing. "Those ribs need binding," she said, digging through their supplies for something suitable. "And your face looks worse than it is," Matthew assured her with a pained smile. "I've had worse falls from a horse." Sarah soaked a cloth in water from their canteen and gently cleaned the dirt and dried blood from his face. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his eyes studying her. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. Sarah paused. "Is that disappointment I hear, Mr. Owens?" "Matt," he corrected. "And no, not disappointment. Just surprise. Your letters were so proper, so refined. I didn't expect someone who could ride mountain trails and face down armed men without flinching." "There's a lot about me that wasn't in those letters," Sarah admitted. "Just as I'm sure there's much about you that wasn't in yours." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose that's true for most mail order arrangements." People show their best sides, hide their worst. He glanced toward Mike, who was gathering wood for a small fire nearby. Mike's a good friend. Best a man could ask for. Yes, Sarah agreed softly. He is. As night fell, the three of them sat around a small, carefully banked fire. Matthew, exhausted from the ordeal and in considerable pain, soon fell into a restless sleep. Sarah and Mike sat in silence for a time, the crackling fire and night sounds of the wilderness the only backdrop to their thoughts. "What will you do now?" Mike finally asked, his voice low to avoid waking Matthew. Sarah poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "I don't know. The arrangement was clear I would come west to be Mr. Owen's wife. But circumstances have changed rather dramatically. Matt still wants to marry you," Mike pointed out, his expression unreadable in the firelight. I could see it in his eyes. "And what about you, Mr. Miller?" Sarah asked boldly, her heart racing. "What do you want?" Mike's gaze met hers across the fire, intense and conflicted. "What I want doesn't matter. Matt's my oldest friend. I wouldn't betray him, even if he's not the right man for me." Sarah persisted. "Even if I'm not the right woman for him." Mike looked away, his jaw tight. "You've known him less than a day. How can you possibly know if he's right or wrong for you?" "I've known you less than 2 days," Sarah countered. "Yet I feel I understand your character better than I ever understood his from months of letters." Mike stood abruptly. "You should get some sleep. I'll take first watch." He walked away into the darkness before she could respond, leaving Sarah alone with her troubled thoughts and the sleeping man she'd traveled so far to marry. Morning brought no resolution to Sarah's dilemma. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey toward Willow Creek, the three of them mostly silent as they rode. By mid-afternoon, the town came into view, a welcome sight after their ordeal. "The doctor's office is on Main Street," Mike directed as they rode in. "Let's get Matt there first thing." Dr. Wilson, a graying man with kind eyes and capable hands, examined Matthew thoroughly before pronouncing his verdict. "2 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, and that cut over your eye will leave a scar, but you'll live. What you need is rest at least a week in bed." "Can't do it, Doc," Matthew protested. "Got a ranch to run." "I'll handle the ranch," Mike said firmly. "You follow orders for once in your stubborn life." After settling Matthew in a room above the doctor's office, Mike and Sarah stepped outside into the late afternoon sunshine. The busy main street of Willow Creek seemed surreal after their wilderness adventure, people going about their normal business, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just miles away. "I should check on your trunk at my store," Mike said awkwardly. "Make sure everything's still there." "Thank you," Sarah replied, falling into step beside him. "For everything." They walked in silence for a few moments before Mike spoke again. "Matt asked me something before the doctor gave him laudanum. Wanted to know if I'd stand up for him." Sarah's heart sank. "At your wedding," she murmured. Mike nodded, not meeting her eyes. "He still wants to marry you, Sarah. Says a woman with your spirit is exactly what he needs in his life." They reached Miller's General Store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. Mike's clerk looked up in surprise. "Mr. Miller, we weren't expecting you back until tomorrow. And you must be Miss Morrison." The young woman smiled warmly. "Your trunk is safe and sound in the back room, miss." "Thank you," Sarah replied automatically, her mind still wrestling with the decision before her. Mike led her to his office at the rear of the store, closing the door behind them for privacy. Sarah's trunk sat in the corner, looking oddly out of place among the ledgers and inventory lists. "You don't have to decide anything right away," Mike said, leaning against his desk. "Matt will need time to heal. You could use that time to get to know him better, see if he's truly the man you want to marry. And if he's not," Sarah asked softly, "what then?" Mike ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Then you're free to leave. Return east, or—" He hesitated. "Or stay here in Willow Creek. Start a new life." "With you?" Sarah pressed, unwilling to dance around the truth any longer. "Sarah, I can't what? Acknowledge what's happening between us? I've seen how you look at me, Mike. It's the same way I look at you." Mike's expression was tormented. "Matt is my oldest friend. He's been through hell, survived a war, built something from nothing out here. I won't take away the woman he's chosen." "I'm not a prize to be won or lost," Sarah said firmly. "I'm a person with my own heart and mind. And my heart is telling me." A knock at the door interrupted her. Mike's clerk poked her head in. Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Miller, but there's a telegram for Miss Morrison. Sarah accepted the folded paper with a murmur of thanks. As she read the brief message, her face paled. What is it? Mike asked, concern evident in his voice. It's from Boston. My father. Sarah swallowed hard. He's had a stroke. They don't expect him to live more than a few weeks. She looked up, anguish in her eyes. I have to go back. Mike's expression softened with sympathy. Of course you do. I'll arrange passage on tomorrow's eastbound stage. Sarah nodded, fighting tears. Would you explain to Mr. Owens? I don't think I can face him right now. I'll tell him, Mike promised. And Sarah, I'm truly sorry about your father. She managed a sad smile. Thank you. For everything. The following morning dawned clear and cool as Sarah prepared to depart Willow Creek. Mike had arranged everything: her ticket, provisions for the journey, even a letter of introduction to a reputable boarding house in Denver where she would wait for the eastbound train. As the stagecoach driver loaded her trunk, Sarah stood awkwardly with Mike on the boardwalk outside his store. I spoke with Matt, Mike said, breaking the silence between them. He understands why you have to leave. Did you tell him everything? Sarah asked quietly. Mike looked away. I told him what he needed to know. The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Sarah knew her time was up, yet she couldn't bring herself to move. This isn't how I imagined my Western adventure would end, she said with a sad smile. Maybe it's not ending, Mike suggested, his voice low. Maybe it's just. Paused. Sarah studied his face, memorizing every line and plain. Will you write to me? Let me know how Mr. Owens recovers. If you want me to. I do. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper, pressing it into his hand. My address in Boston. I'll be there until. She couldn't finish the thought. Until your father passes, Mike completed gently. I understand. The driver called a final boarding, and Sarah knew she could delay no longer. Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a swift kiss to Mike's cheek. Goodbye, Michael Miller, she whispered, then turned and hurried to the waiting stagecoach before he could respond. As the coach pulled away from Willow Creek, Sarah watched through the window as Mike's figure grew smaller in the distance. She touched her fingers to her lips, wondering if she would ever see him again. 3 months passed. Sarah's father lingered longer than the doctors predicted, but finally succumbed to a second, more severe stroke. The weeks that followed were filled with the business of death: the funeral, the reading of the will, the sorting of a lifetime's possessions. Throughout it all, letters arrived regularly from Colorado territory. Mike wrote of Matthew's recovery, of spring calving on the ranch, of Chambers' arrest for conspiracy and kidnapping after Coleman turned state's evidence. His letters never mentioned feelings or the connection they'd shared, yet Sarah treasured each one, reading them until the pages grew soft from handling. 6 months after her hasty departure from Willow Creek, Sarah found herself once again on a westbound train. Her father's estate, modest but respectable, had provided her with the means for independence. She no longer needed to marry for security or stability. She could choose her own path. As the train pulled into Denver, Sarah gathered her belongings with nervous anticipation. Mike's last letter had mentioned he would meet her at the station if she decided to return west. She had telegraphed her arrival date, but received no confirmation that he'd gotten the message. The platform was crowded with travelers and those greeting them. Sarah scanned the faces anxiously, her heart sinking as she failed to spot the one she sought. Perhaps he hadn't received her telegram. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Sarah, the voice came from behind her. She turned to find Mike standing there, hat in hand, his eyes warm with emotion. You came, she breathed, unable to hide her joy. Of course I came. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. I would have come to Boston if you'd asked. What about Mr. Owens? Sarah asked, suddenly remembering the complication that had separated them. Mike's expression grew serious. Matt and I had a long talk after you left. Several, actually. He admitted that he'd been more in love with the idea of a wife than with you specifically. Said he could tell that you and I. He faltered. That you and I what? Sarah prompted, her heart racing. That we had something rare. Something he wouldn't stand in the way of. Mike reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded, yellowed paper. He gave me this. Said I should decide what to do with it. Sarah recognized it immediately, the cruel note that had started their entire adventure. the one Mike had burned except for a small corner. In the space where damaged goods had been written, someone had crossed out damaged and written wife above it. I don't understand, Sarah said, looking from the note to Mike's face. Matt's way of giving his blessing, Mike explained. He said if I wanted to make you my wife instead of returning to Cinder, he'd stand up for me like I would have for him. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as the meaning became clear. And do you want to make me your wife? In answer, Mike dropped to one knee right there on the busy train platform, heedless of the curious stares from passers-by. Sarah Morrison, I've thought of little else since the day you left. Will you marry me? Not because you need security or because of some mail-order arrangement, but because two people found each other against all odds. Sarah's heart felt too full for her chest. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Mike rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the longing and love they'd kept contained for months. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, he rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, Sarah, he murmured. Home, she agreed, knowing that wherever this man was, she had found her place at last. They were married 2 weeks later in Willow Creek's small church, with Matthew Owens standing proudly as Mike's best man. And if the story of their unusual courtship became something of a legend in Colorado territory, well, that was just one more unexpected chapter in the adventure they had begun together. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Sarah would smile at her husband and say simply, "Your father refused to return to Cinder." And Mike would take her hand, his eyes still full of the same wonder and love as that day on the train platform, grateful that a cruel note had led him to the greatest happiness of his life.